It's Barry Ruby, and we are here to get into video number 2, the subject of which is net operating income, also known as NOI, and value. So, in this commercial introduction to commercial real estate course that I'm offering here, I think it would be important to do a couple of things before we dive into the two elements that we're going to be looking at in this video number 2. And they are net operating income and value, and a thing called a cap rate. So the first thing that I want to do is introduce you to the fact that this pro forma has been built to walk from one element to the next sequentially, so that the pro forma itself is a reflection of the commercial real estate process at large. What I mean by that is what we're going to do is we are going to find for net operating income and establish the fact that it is the defining element that allows you to create and understand the value of a piece of property by use of a cap rate. And that once you understand that, you're going to take that value and figure out how you fund it with a combination of debt and equity, which is known as a capital stack. And once you do that, once you've introduced a loan into the mix, that you still have that same net operating income, that you're going to have to pay debt service, which is principal and interest payments on the loan that you created. And that in turn creates what's known as net cash flow, not net operating income, but net cash flow, which is the money that you would receive for the equity that you invested, and actually factors that into a rate of return known as a cash on cash or return on equity. And lastly, that net operating income has a relationship that needs to be understood and honored as it relates to the amount of money that net operating income generates versus the amount of money that has got to get paid to your lender in the form of debt service. And this debt service coverage ratio, what it means, and how you deal with it to make sure that it meets industry standards so you can actually get a loan. Okay, so that's a mouthful here, but that it's important for you to understand where you are at any point in the way of trying to pick up how commercial real estate works. And the last piece that I want to talk to you about before we get rolling into NOI and value is that the goal that I have in offering these courses that we're doing right now is for you to understand the language spoken relative to commercial real estate. There really is a very widely used, accepted set of terminology that goes on that forms the language of commercial real estate. And that language is uniform against all commercial real estate assets, as is the applicability of those line items and the way that you measure the performance of the numbers that come out of your analysis in terms of language itself, metrics called an acquisition cap rate, for instance, or debt service coverage ratio, or what are they talking about when they say cash on cash return. So again, set of language particular to the metrics that are applied to commercial real estate assets, and then there are the metrics themselves, which means that there's two things that you have to understand about those, which is how they work and what it is that they mean, what they are and how they work and what they mean. So that's all of the stuff that we're going to try and teach here throughout the next 3 videos, including this one. So let's get into it in terms of underwriting a net operating income, how it is figured and how it is used to determine value the property brings in. If what you're doing is analyzing something in the abstract, which is what we're doing right here. This isn't an actual deal. What you would do, or you could even start with anyway, even if you did have an actual deal that you were underwriting, is to try to figure out how much money the project could possibly make. And that figure really is 100% of the space that's released is rented 100% of the time, and that would mean that the gross potential income is exactly that, the most that the commercial real estate asset could make. Well, we know that in the real world, typically you don't realize as your bottom line the rental income that without getting tossed and turned by things of reality like vacancies and turnover. So in this case, what I have assumed is 5% for vacancies and 5% for turnover. This is a pull-down menu that you can use, and you can adjust it for everything from nothing to 20% as you wish, or as it is that you are assuming. Because why? Well, because you were told by a seller and or its brokers by producing information in the form of offering memorandums or financial statements that in place of gross potential income, what you would use is something called T12. T is short for trailing, and 12 means 12 months. So what you would typically want to do is, if it's available, is to get that information, the actual operating income that was taken in by the project that you're looking at over its previous 12 months of operation. So in this case, what we're calling it is gross potential income. But if in fact a seller will make that information available to you, that's what you plug into this cell. Again, to remind you, every cell in bold blue is a major input. Every cell in magenta is an input that measures sensitivity. And we'll get into that in just a couple of minutes over my being able to show you what that means. So if you are either using T12 or the gross potential income as I just described, either you then apply these vacancies to it. Let's go back to 10%, 5% for the vacancy and 5% for the turnover. And what that produces is the thing called net rental income. The net rental income is very important for you to keep separate from anything else that you do from it, whether it's deduct operating expenses from it or add other income to it. I prefer to use net operating income and take the vacancies and turnover only against the T12 or the projected gross potential income, because it just further segregates and specifies how much money the project is actually making from rent and how much else is being generated in the form of other income. So in this case, what I've used is 2% against the net rental income as the basis of other income. Again, if you're underwriting a project that information is being offered through part of the T12 data, then you would use that. In this case, let's just assume it's 2%, and that is not an outlandish up or down. It's a reasonable value to put in there, the 2%. So once you have put in the 2% and generated the other income that's associated with net rental income, though 2, and if you look up here again, or if you either didn't or see the video number 1, or you have but you need a refresher on it, I want to remind you that this pro forma operates and has been designed with a bunch of variables that are named cells. And those named cells are so named so that instead of seeing add C20 to C21, what you're seeing here is understanding that the way that effective gross income is created is taking net rental income and adding other income to it. So that's now we are at a place where we understand, and let's say we're happy with EGI, effective gross income, being $1.4 million, give or take. So the next variable that we come to is operating expenses. And we must pause here for a moment and tip our hat to acknowledge the fact that after the amount of money that a commercial real estate asset brings in, the single most important line item in determining net operating income, which is the single most important factor in determining value, is operating expenses. So in this case, I've used 40%, and 40% is a reasonable number for grade B and maybe some C plus properties. 45% to even 50% would be more the norm. But again, as far as rules of thumb, when it comes to this one, folks, I've got to tell you, you really have got to be aware of what number really belongs there. And one way to do that is I'm just going to flip over here and real quick and show you that there is a worksheet that I've put together that looks just like this, that you would populate to get a much more definitive handle on what those operating expenses are. But for now, let's stay with the inputs that we have right here. We're happy with the income, we're happy with the vacancies and turnover amounts that we put in, the other income that we put there, and therefore we're happy with effective gross income. And let's say we are equally happy with 45% of effective gross income going to cover operating expenses. The variable cell right here, again, is a sensitivity cell. Let's use a pull-down menu for a second, okay? And let's just say, what if? What if the thing that we're calling 45% turns into be 46%? Well, the what if is that the additional 1% on this $1.4 million represents $14,000 more in operating expenses, and capitalized, meaning converting, and we'll get into how to do that and what that means in a minute, but capitalizing it, meaning that we take that $14,000 of negative cash flow and convert it to a value capped at 6%, meaning you divide it into that $14,000, represents over almost $250,000. So I want to repeat that. A 1% swing in OPEX in this prototype project represents $14,000 in change in cash flow, capitalized at 6%, creates a negative value in less value of that project because it's got that much less NOI that's coming to it of almost $250,000. So is sensitivity and net operating income and having it be as close to reality with a certain amount of, if there, you don't know, a certain amount of contingency that you put into the project to protect yourself, because as we just saw, a 1% swing is almost $250,000 of value. So that said, let us leave net operating income because we understand it to be $787,000 and change. And what we're going to do is try to figure out how much is a reasonable price to pay for this net operating income. And it's important for you to understand that the net operating income is what you are purchasing when you buy an income producing property. It is what you're purchasing. In the same way that when you buy a bond, you don't buy the bond for the bond. You buy the bond for the yield, right? Think of the net operating income being the yield that would be the counterpart of a bond as it relates to a commercial real estate property. The $13 million that you would be willing to pay is assumed to be being paid all cash, and we'll get into that in a minute. Okay, but this $787,000 of cash flow does not have any debt service against it, meaning there's no loan payments that are being taken against it because there's no loan that's come into the picture yet. Okay, so another way of saying that this 6% represents the acquisition cap rate of the project that the buyer is buying with this cash flow. Another way of saying that is this $13 million purchase price that is being paid all cash also represents the cash-on-cash return that that same buyer would be willing to accept if they paid $13 million in cash for the $787,000 value. Let me show you what I mean again here, just real quick, okay? What you're doing is you are buying the net operating income, check up here, okay? The net operating income divided by the purchase price that you're willing to pay for it. And what that means is you're willing to accept a 6% cash on cash, unlevered. Unlevered means before you put leverage, which is another word for debt or a loan, onto the property. Okay, so to spend a little bit of time here, bit more time lingering into the world of this second data point called cap rates and value. Okay, let's take a look over here on this same line where here cap rate is determining value, because what we've done is we've assumed a cap rate of 6% and we've divided that into the net operating income, and that's the value that comes out of that exercise. In reverse, let's say that what you had was a seller that said they want, let's put 15 million bucks in there. If the seller stated a purchase price rather than said, why don't you figure out how much the deal's making, net operating income, and how much you'd be willing to pay me for it. So the same way, if you stated this price, I'd be willing to pay you $13 million, then you're looking for that 6% unlevered cash on cash yield as an acquisition cap rate. If you said $15 million, you're saying, hey, I'm going to capitalize this thing you're talking about. If I did that, then instead of receiving 6%, I'm receiving a 5.25% cash on cash return on my unlevered investment, which is 1.8, almost $1.9 million difference, and that it represents a purchase price of 14% lower than the thing that I said I'd buy at 6%. So the major takeaways here, let's go look at them again. You're always buying, once you determine the NOI remains the same. If you're determining value by acquisition cap rate, then you're plugging a figure to determine, here you're using a figure to determine the value. If you use 6%, say I want 6% return on my money, then you're willing to pay $13 million before you get a loan on it. If you're looking at it and saying, you know what, 5% ain't so bad. So if you're willing to take less of a return, it must mean that you're willing to pay more. And in this case, the more is you're paying $15.7 million instead of $13.1 million. So hope all of that's clear. Before we leave this whole deal with cap rate, is to look at, again, another one of these inputs that are sensitivity inputs, and say, gee, if where we're at is at a 6% cap, what should this price that at a 6% cap, that's $13 million, be if what we did was we adjusted the cap rate up a half a point 2 times to the right, meaning that 6% turns to 6.5% cap rate, 6.5% cap rate turns to a 7% cap rate. What happens there is the story that's being told here. Instead of $13 million, the deal would be worth, for that same NOI, would be worth to the buyer only $12 million. And that represents a dive of $1 million. Instead of 13, you're paying $12 million less for that half a point bump in your unlevered cap rate. And lastly, a full point, 7% from 6%, creates a swing of almost $1.9 million and a 17% drop in value. That $1,850,000 versus for 11 million versus the $13 million. So before we close out, let me just say thank you again for looking in on this video number 2. Hopefully it explains a bit more, hopefully even a lot more, about NOI and value. And if you don't have it yet, please go to groundupdevelopment.com, visit the courses folder on the page in that website, and you can download the working copy of this pro forma and the videos that explain it. This second video and the other 3 that accompany it, no charge whatsoever. And hope you do that. Hope you use this stuff. Hope you join our private Facebook group when you visit that website as well. Thank you again for your interest, and we will see you in the next video, video number 3, where what we're going to do is cover capital stack, net cash flow, debt service coverage ratio, and then do a quick visit at looking at the cheat sheet that talks to you about project performance for all of those things. Have a good one.